So I'd like to formally kick off today's event by inviting Honey up to the front of the room to deliver a land acknowledgement.
So I'll start us off with the land acknowledgement. So for anyone who's in person, we are currently on the traditional territory shared by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations, which was acknowledged in a dish with one spoon wampum. That wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory and one spoon to represent that the people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. I want to acknowledge the intersection of disability and indigeneity specifically is often complicated, overlooked, and ignored, specifically in research. The colonial construction of medicalized approaches to disability aims to delegitimize alternative perspectives to life and identity that Indigenous perspectives offer, as they are often in contempt with one another. Disability has also historically been used as a political tool to weaken Indigenous populations, like we've seen with Nazi narrows. Yet we continuously fail to acknowledge Indigenous perspectives to disability. If you're interested in learning more, I have a few resources that I can guide you to. Please feel free to either send an email or send the Maccess Instagram a message, or just follow up with me as well.
Thank you.
So NEADS, the National Educational Association of Disabled Students, is a consumer-driven, cross-disability, cross-Canada charitable organization supporting access to education and employment for post-secondary students and recent graduates with disabilities. Our work revolves around three key strategic program areas: improving experience in class and on campus, disabled student debt reduction, and improving employment opportunities. We offer a variety of events, resources, reports, financial assistance programs, and opportunities for disabled students and recent graduates. We collaborate with post-secondary stakeholders, other non-governmental organizations, employers, disability service providers, and community members to improve opportunities in higher education and the labor market for persons with disabilities. We provide ongoing advice and guidance to Employment and Social Development Canada and other provincial and territorial governments, and work to promote programs and services that support education for disabled students. Before continuing, I would like to take a minute to introduce our team, both in person and online. As I had mentioned, my name is Katja Newman, and I'm our Financial Assistance Program Director. Here with me in the physical space is Chloe Godin-Jacques, our Educational Program Director, and Aaliyah Petzek-Grant, our Website Director. We are joined online by Alan Bridgman, our Technology Consultant, Frank Smith, our National Coordinator, and a shout out to a couple other of our team members who are joining us. Fatima Charar, one of our Building Employment Pathways coaches, and Elizabeth Mohler, one of our consultants. NEADS has a collection of 4 websites. NEADS.ca is our main webpage and houses important program updates and organizational information. Breaking It Down.ca is our employment portal. This website houses information for employees with disabilities who are trying to navigate the employment space, as well as employers who are trying to create inclusive and accessible workplaces. We also have disabilityawards.ca, which is our directory of hundreds of scholarship opportunities specifically for students with disabilities across Canada. And finally, we have our disability rights online website, which was created in collaboration with the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. This webpage contains online self-paced training on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the secondary optional protocol. And now I will hand it over to Chloe for a bit more of an in-depth look at some of NEADS's current projects.
Thank you, Katia. We currently have three major projects. First, our employment pathways project is innovative and leader in partnership with Sustainable Livelihoods Canada. NEADS offers personalized employment readiness and holistic coaching that builds on the necessary foundation for a successful transition to work. There is also a research component to this project. Any questions can be directed to Katia with the co-manager. Next, we have the financial assistance program that addresses the disproportionate and unmet needs of disabled and neurodiverse students. There are two components to this project. First of all, we have grants of $2,000 to offset the cost of various items, such as assistive technology, as well as mental health and wellness services. The second component is our partner funded tuition scholarship. Our third project is the Virtual Access for project. What started as a 2-year project led to an incredible 4 years, which has been generously funded by the Employment and Social Development Canada support for student learning program. Unfortunately, this project is concluded at the end of this month, so March 2025. Throughout the past 4 years. The project aims to empower and support disabled and neurodiverse students while they navigate the many facets of post-secondary education. The NEADS team has strived to offer programming in which mutual care and collaboration was at the forefront, and we aim to provide spaces for discussions and research sharing, such examples of the activities in the project have included webinars, quarterly reports, and expansion of our financial assistance program as well as this store. Since the fall of 2022, the NEADS team has been touring the country to engage with disabled students, community members, faculty members, as well as allies. We have visited 11 post-secondary campuses, and McMaster is a 12th and final stop. We adapt to foster accessibility and inclusivity at each of our events, including the state of the school store, which is why the stop are in a hybrid format. This allows folks to partake in a way that is most meaningful to them and that best represents their diverse and intersectional needs. Thank you to Maccess for partnering with us on this final tour setup. We're very excited to be with you all.
So hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Mohler. I am been a long time friend of NEADS. Oh my gosh, over 10 years. Wow. So I've been worked in research. I've done work with a number of different projects, including this one. And I'm thrilled to kind of come back today and fly in virtually to talk about all things collective action and advocacy. And just to introduce myself, I'm a PhD candidate at Western University in health and rehab science, and my work uses critical discourse analysis to understand how individuals who use self-managed attendant care resist and negotiate access to care. So here we just have the agenda for what we're going to cover today. We talk about a little bit of an introduction, talk about imposter syndrome. We're going to talk about some collective action, and we're going to talk about some experiences of folks in graduate and post-secondary education. So again, here's our table of contents just to kind of show what we're going to cover. I'm not sure why, but my slides are advancing on the screen, but not in. Okay, so introduction, here we go. So as we know, students with disabilities in higher education, we often experience isolation and many barriers. So this is due to a number of kind of, confounding aspects. It could be simply that we're the only one in our program, on our campus, in our department, or we're the only one that we know about. And I'll get into that earlier because knowing is half the battle. It also could be just as simple as, perhaps we're nervous about sort of disclosing or talking about our disability. And so that in turn creates some isolation. So as we know, there's a lot of barriers and reasons why people don't socially engage. Could be that programs like Orientation Week are not accessible. I remember my Orientation Week in undergrad was very much loud, crowded spaces, a lot of very much visual and physical based activities. So for a lot of different reasons, we experience isolation on our campuses. Certainly, for me, one of the biggest things was, I went to a post-secondary campus, Laurier Brantford, that was very small, and that was great in a lot of ways, but I was the only visibly disabled student on campus. So sometimes I was known, but not always maybe in the ways that I wanted to be known. People knew who I was. I didn't necessarily know who they were. And certainly, I think part of that problem and the reason that I found myself so isolated was, really just this idea of, where are my people and how do I find them? And sometimes not knowing how to ask for accommodations or what accommodations to ask for. Certainly at Western, when I attended my master's, we'll talk about my PhD in a bit because that was during the pandemic. Again, I was in a much larger institution, but grad school is really, in a lot of ways, manifests a lot of ableist practices, whether that be sort of the pace of it, what you're expected to do, how you're expected to perform. And that can feel really isolating, especially when perhaps you're a first generation student in your family and you haven't necessarily had anybody that you can speak to about what to expect in graduate school, let alone what to expect in graduate school as a student with a disability. So I think, graduate school certainly presented different challenges. So in undergrad, a lot of my challenges specific to sort of social connectedness were around how do I even meet people in residence when so many activities weren't designed from a sort of inclusive mindset. And then kind of this imposter feeling, which we'll talk about in a bit, around like anytime I ask for an accommodation or I talk about an accommodation, am I, going to be perceived as asking for too much? And am I asking for too much? In graduate school, certainly, there was a lot of barriers, I would say, even in student unions, where you would think kind of there wouldn't be. So one thing that really comes to mind for me was forced sort of meetings in the evening in person if you wanted to be on student government committees, which presents a lot of challenges for people, not just with disabilities, but with childcare issues. I think a lot of issues around what's expected in a role in student union. There's a lot of sort of, again, pressure to perform on top of your academics. Not at the time a whole lot of sort of appetite for splitting a role or co-leading a role. So if you did want to take on a role within student government, what did that look like? And then I think just a lot of sort of unconscious bias from other students about, do you really deserve to be here and do you really belong? And sometimes that was sort of, messaged within what was being said or not said, and then other times quite explicit. Certainly within graduate school, we know that there's much work outside the classroom that's required. So in many graduate programs, you're required to apply for fellowships or scholarships. In my graduate program, for example, it's required you apply for Tri-Council funding. And both times I applied and I did successfully get it. The big challenge was navigating the application form, which was not accessible. So a lot of PDF images, a lot of kind of those CAPTCHAs where you have to match a paper plane or a bus. And so those things present barriers. And the challenging part is that so much of a grad student's life is outside the classroom, publishing, getting funding, going to conferences. That was a huge barrier for me. And unfortunately, it's very cyclical because as you apply for funding or as you apply to even get a professorial role, they look at things like, what's your publication record? How many conferences have you been to? And some of those things are really steeped in what I would say is very kind of quantitative, objective, post-positivist research, but also a lot of those opportunities are difficult if you have, needs like, for example, attendant care or require sighted guide assistance. And so some of those conferences can be really difficult to get to. And that's definitely one of the perks from the pandemic is that we now have things on Zoom, like this event. So certainly barriers to finding a community. Everybody wants to belong. But I think, certainly in higher education, there's a lot of barriers that we face. I think part of it is connecting and how do we find our people, right? And so a big piece is offices for students with disabilities, we know are very steeped in a medical model, but there also isn't a whole lot of sort of peer support or opportunities to connect. So, whether that's meeting other students, I know Western does now have a peer mentor program for undergrad students with disabilities to be matched with a student in a more senior year. However, that doesn't exist at the graduate level yet. I would love it to. And so again, like, how do we find our people? How do we know who's here? And then I think a big piece of it too is just sort of a feeling of a place to go and to be and to belong. Whether that looks like just sort of a student lounge with some assistive technology where you can go and hang out, or something more informal. But those places on campus are difficult to find, especially if you're new and you don't know where they are or how to access them. So again, just kind of thinking more about barriers to finding a community. Another piece I think for me, there's a lot of interconnected factors. So there's stigma for sure, but I think there's also, ableism that manifests in our programs. So, in terms of the timeline. So when I think about my program, it's a 4-year funding window. Like, who completes a PhD in 4 years, let alone if you have extra access needs. And I don't just mean disability, it could be caregiving, it could be, needing to take time off to work. So that, those ableist kind of structures manifest within our systems at post-secondary, and they present real challenges. And so one of the things that we can do as advocates is we can push back. So in our department, recently we had an opportunity to be surveyed, to ask about our experience, and I spoke very openly about the restrictions of the funding window. I met with my department chair one-on-one, and we talked about some additional funding that I could potentially access. So I think even in these systems, which are moving very slowly and, to be more inclusive, we have these kind of ableist things that manifest in our timelines. I'll give you another example. In our classrooms, certainly due dates are required for assignments, but one of the things our department's doing is a 72-hour window. So we are offering in our department people the opportunity within 72 hours to submit your assignment and get no late penalties. That's the way that we're kind of combating that ableism that is existing in academia in terms of our timelines. Productivity, like, how much do we have to be productive? What does that look like? How do we challenge that? So maybe I didn't publish 5 peer-reviewed articles this year, but I gave service to my community. And I think that's a really big part of how ableism manifests is we are asked as students with disabilities to sit on committees, to advise, to consult, and that's great. But there's a lot of invisible labor in that ask, and it's often unrecognized, not just monetarily, but how do we put that on a grant application? Like, no, I didn't publish but I'm a disabled faculty member and I mentored 5 students in the last 3 years. So all things to think about. So imposter syndrome, our favorite, not. I want to really unpack this concept of imposter syndrome and disability, because really for me, this is at the crux of so much of, what's challenging about asking for accommodations. We all know imposter syndrome as academics. Where it gets more complicated is when we're academics who have, and I'm putting this in air quotes, additional needs. And I think where that's challenging is, even I think about my own work, asking for a support person to assist me in the library if materials are in a printed format, or asking for a support person to assist if you're traveling to a conference. And what will that be seen as by our peers? Will it be seen as us getting extra help? I know certainly for me that's been challenged not just by peers but by faculty. Is it seen as quote unquote cheating? If we need extra time to complete a comprehensive or qualifying exam. So all of that internalizes within us and internalizes as ableism, and then we start to believe those things. And so we're navigating these space, navigating this imposter syndrome in a really uncomfortable and complex way. And of course, it's graduate students, faculty, we all experience it, but there's an extra layer, and I think something really important to talk about around disability and imposter syndrome, and how that manifests and how we can combat it, whether that's, collectively together talking about it like we are today, or whether that's just simply writing about it. I've written a couple of articles in the Mighty about sort of navigating that space. I think we talk a lot about advocacy, and collective advocacy can be very liberating. It can be a way to make change. There's a lot of joy in coming together, in resistance, in radical love. But advocacy is hard. And I do use this word burden quite intentionally, because it can be when you've had to say to the 5th faculty member, these are my needs, and you've had to do that disclosure over and over. And there's a lot of sort of emotional labor within that, especially when you're dealing with the things we've been talking about, like imposter syndrome. And so I think why I say this is it's okay and it's important to take breaks. So to know when individually or collectively you're part of a project and something's too much, to know to take that step back and say, I can't do this right now, I don't have the spoons. So spoon theory just being this idea that we have a drawer of spoons, metaphorically, and there's only so many in the drawer. And so one of the things I've had to learn, it's very hard, is to say no. And I think that this is a big piece of it, because, again, we're always expected to advocate. We'll have professionals tell us, why don't you just advocate for that? And it's okay to say now's not when I can take that on. And that's okay. So the balancing act. So we frequently find ourselves navigating a complex sort of coil or balancing acts between competing pressures, right? So this significant kind of balancing act really compounds those feelings of not belonging or of trying to belong. Sometimes I know I felt like I have my foot in multiple worlds. I have my foot in the graduate able-bodied world, my foot in the collective advocacy disability space, where I'm so fortunate to be, and then my foot in my own sort of professional world, because I'm also a working professional. So the balancing act is really tricky. And I think part of it too is the challenge that we have in sort of this burden of proof. So proving that we're quote unquote disabled enough to receive services. I know for many, many disability offices, you're constantly sort of providing that paperwork. There's often funding that we need to advocate for to get. A huge challenge, I think, is affording assessments, and that's a big piece. And so again, kind of realizing this dream where maybe we're not always having to prove that we need everything, but maybe classes are just accessible. I took a class in my first year of my PhD, and it was online, fully accessible, captions, audio description for videos, readings, multiple means of engagement, and that was huge in my success. So finding community is a path forward. So, kind of some hope here. We want some hope. So absolutely imposter syndrome is common, and we've talked about this a little bit with students with disabilities. It's definitely more of a thing. But what can we do? Taking on leadership roles. And so you might want to start small. So you might want to look at options to volunteer within your student government. Every school has a different structure. So maybe you're helping on a committee to and it's maybe not anything to do with accessibility, but you're coming onto that committee with your accessibility lens. And so then you're able to sort of offer some insights. And then maybe there it's taking on role as a chair of a committee. And maybe, like me, I was kind of instrumental at my student government sort of forming an accessibility committee that did work within our student union to try to promote accessibility through a whole bunch of activities. So you can start small. Leadership sometimes is a big, scary word with a capital L, but it doesn't have to be. So I think, to create truly inclusive higher educations, we really want to think about institutions moving beyond just individual accommodations to more, approaches to UDL. So I talked about that course that I took. It could be, flexible deadlines. It could be multiple means to engage like we're doing today. So a hybrid course. It could be something as simple as just having language around when you're applying as a graduate student to a graduate program or to an undergraduate program around, we welcome diverse applications. So at Western, I sat on a committee for reviewing our graduate admissions process. And we talked about the equity lens of looking at, not everybody comes into graduate school with publications or 5 excellent references or, all of this leadership experience, but they might bring something else that's really great. So we want to bring space forward for people to share their story in a different way and how they might contribute to our community of learners. So I think we know the impact of isolation. Obviously, there's mental health impacts. As we know, as students with a disability, when we're navigating accommodations, ableism, imposter syndrome, trying to find therapists that are able and willing to work with us, that impacts on our mental health. So certainly there's consequences there, but also, consequences to our sort of ability to connect and find community. So those are kind of big things to keep in mind. Certainly our self-esteem, health, and self-perception as well. So, impact on our self-perception. I know for myself, when I started my master's program, I questioned whether I should be there, questioned whether why I wasn't making friends, what was wrong. Sometimes I would bring up accessibility in a conversation, whether it was in the classroom or whether it was in a more student union leadership space, and you kind of get that silence where people sort of weren't necessarily knowing what to say, or people would just simply change the topic. So that's a really kind of big piece around experiencing isolation when you don't feel like you're being further validated. So we've talked a lot about some of these social barriers to disability. Certainly things around how, who are things like orientation weeks designed for. I think that's getting better. At least at Western, we have events during the day, things that are available on the weekend for people that are working, alcohol-free spaces, spaces that don't cost a lot of money to attend, but there's still always, I find, challenges with access. So we're getting there, but we're not quite there. So that's great. There's a big barbecue happening. How is somebody going to navigate that who might need ASL or who might require a sighted guide? So lots of work still to be done. That. So I think really this is where we want to think about, individual, really this powerful shift occurs. We have a group together, it might start over coffee talking about a specific struggle that we're having or a concern. And then it's, hey, why don't we form a group? Or why don't we go collectively to our department chair and talk about a concern? And that's a really beautiful thing because there's strength in numbers, but there's also strength that when one person needs to drop the baton for whatever reason, there's people there to pick it up. And that's why collective action is so important. And of course, I think too, we're stronger together, we can do more together. So creating connection opportunities, there's lots of, ways to, connect and create those opportunities. So we've talked about some, could be on, online is a huge way that people collectively advocate. You put a post up on social media, people comment, right there, you've got collective action. You find a group on campus. You're that first person that speaks up, and then people sort of join in. So as a teaching assistant at my university, I always struggle to be accommodated because we're sort of in this weird student employer space. And so no department wanted to take on the conversation around accommodations, but turns out I wasn't alone. And so when we had our teaching assistant strike last spring, which was quite stressful, on the picket line, I talked to a number of students who said, yeah, we need to fix this. And we formed a group together to talk about TA access. So that's kind of an example of how that can kind of happen. So, again, collective force for systemic change. To me, the teaching assistant piece was a really big part of that. Now we were able to go to the TA sort of union and kind of push to have an accessibility committee. It's certainly not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. So again, small steps. So again, thinking about one of the things that I think is really helpful is just finding those opportunities of interest and being able to build from those. So I think, sadly, the picket line was a common ground. People were already feeling like they weren't being heard as teaching assistants and weren't being valued for their work. And so because of that, we kind of had that moment of sort of collection act to then talk about what are some of these concerns. So collective advocacy, again, can transform on-campus environments and institutional policies, certainly across Canada, and creating that lasting change that's going to benefit many generations of disabled students. And when we unite our voices, we can hopefully shift institutional culture. And I think a really big example of this is here in Ontario. We have the education standards, which has been approved and hasn't yet been enacted, but the accessible education standard really speaks to not just in the classroom experiences, but the social and on-campus experiences of students with disabilities. So that's an example of when people come together, things like that change can happen. So again, many more examples of how collective advocacy can improve the university experience of disabled students. So certainly some collective advocacy efforts can lead to, so certainly physical campus accessibility. So one that I think of at Western, years ago, we had a student, now he's a faculty that's in a wheelchair. There was no accessible transportation on our campus. Dr. Preston, along with many others, but I know he was lead fought for an accessible access van on campus. So that's an example of that sort of physical access piece. Policy changes. So we've kind of touched on a few of those already. Cultural transformation. So kind of what is the language we're using when we're welcoming people to our campus community? How are we welcoming them? What's considered a good quote unquote application for post-secondary? So is it just grades, or are we allowing people to submit a letter of intent or a letter explaining where they might have had some barriers in their education and what they'd be willing to and able to add? So all things to consider. So when disabled students, when we do advocate, the impact extends far beyond immediate accessibility. So obviously future students, more inherently accessible, and opportunities for faculty and staff develop increased accessibility awareness. I know at our campus, that's been a really big thing through my work with our student union. I was able to develop a suite of teaching and learning resources for our faculty learners to help them understand accessibility in the classroom. And then certainly thinking more about universal design. I am aware that it is 1:11 and I'm sure I've gone past my 20 minutes. So I think I will stop screen sharing now and just open it up for some questions. I didn't quite get through all my slides, but I think we've had a really rich conversation and I'm just mindful of time. So I will open it up to any questions or comments. I'm not hearing any, but I don't know if that's one of those, the room isn't projecting or folks are typing in their questions or you simply have none. And all three of those are perfectly valid. Okay, no questions from the room and I'm not seeing any questions online. So I will thank Chloe for inviting me to present. I hope that this sort of addressed some of the feelings folks have around just kind of navigating that imposter syndrome piece and just the role that collective advocacy does play in accessibility and accommodations on campus. So thank you very much, folks.
Welcome back, everyone. We will now proceed to a presentation delivered by Annie Starr, who is the Assistant Director at Maccess.
Perfect. So, as everyone in the room at least knows, but I'm sure not on Zoom, my name is Honey. I am the outgoing assistant director for Maccess. So this is my last few weeks as a part of the service. But I thought I'd give a little bit of, I guess, an introduction to what Maccess is. We're quite a small service on campus. And so, yeah. I guess as an introduction to myself, I am currently in my last year of social psychology. I just got accepted into York's Critical Disability Studies program, which is amazing and really exciting. I do research in the area of self-diagnosis as like a tool against medical practices of disability. And then also I just completed a thesis project that looked at the inaccessibility of religious spaces, which is really interesting. So I guess more like the question is, who is Maccess? So Maccess is a peer support service run on campus, manager level downs, so director, assistant director level down, by disabled or relatedly disability identifying students. So that involves 2 part-time managers, which is Nat, who is in the room with me, and myself. We're run by 13 executive volunteers who spend a little bit more time planning our events, helping us with running our space. And just generally being there to bounce ideas off of, which has been amazing. And we have over 40 peer support volunteers this year. We actually received over 90 applicants this year, which was a big surprise. And we're hoping to keep up that excitement for our service within the next year. We were just unfortunately unable to handle the capacity of applications that we received. We also have a friendly bear mascot named Otis, who is in the room with us today. He's a very big help in our service and was in addition over the summer. And he's very popular. He's well dressed and well adored by our volunteer team. So we can access our space. We are in the very basement of Musk, which would make sense for a disability club. We are quite hidden away from everything else, which is a little embarrassing on our student union's part, but that's whatever. So anyone who identifies with chronic illness, madness, neurodivergence, anyone who is deaf or hard of hearing, those who are navigating inaccessibility or accessing accommodations, people who are self-diagnosed or self-identify as disabled, or other experiences which are part of the larger disability justice movement are welcome to access our service. We don't really police this, as disability can look different from person to person. We encourage people even questioning disability identification to come and visit. It's a really lovely environment. We've spent the past summer upgrading our space, which was really nice. As you can see, we have a mural painted on the wall, which is in our presentation, which was done in-house by one of our executive volunteers. We also have a few furniture upgrades, and our space has a wheelchair accessibility button for both doors. and has the 3-foot mandated walkway for individuals who use wheelchairs to be able to manage to get through our space. So in terms of what services we provide quite a bit of things that should be mandated by the university, but unfortunately fall on the hands of volunteers. So that involves in-person peer support. So as I mentioned before, all of our volunteers are required to be disabled or identify with disability. And so in-person peer support, I've been asked before what that kind of looks like, and it's hard to explain unless you experience it. And it's not therapy and it's not like going to the doctor. It's more like asking a friend for advice on something. Or a common thing that happens in our space is people will ask for body doubles whenever they need to accomplish work. And so that's kind of what peer support looks like. It can also look like, honestly, just sitting in the space after hours if someone is having a really rough day and just kind of having a conversation with them. It can also look like taking a nap with the space and just making sure nobody walks in and like steals someone's stuff, which is really appreciated. We also run community circles, which is something that we've done previously, but unfortunately didn't happen last year, and we're finally getting it back off the ground. So community circles are our space after our space closes for individuals who identify within a certain community to kind of come together and have conversations with each other about like the struggles that they experience, or just ask for support, or even just kind of go through activities with one another that would be beneficial for them. So for example, we have a gut feelings community circle on Mondays. We have a navigating neurodivergence community circle. We have a writing and speaking feelings workshop. And then we also have a deaf and hard of hearing workshop that runs on our Fridays as well. We also do various events and socials throughout the year. So for example, we just had a coffee house last night, which was really amazing. It was an opportunity for disabled students to kind of show their stuff, whether it be through song or poetry or dance, or even a little magic show, which was really cute. We have online and in-person advocacy campaigns, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But we basically advocate on behalf of disabled students as well, which is a lot of work, but we really appreciate our volunteers who take part in it. We also provide advocacy support. So for individual students who may be dealing with difficulties with professors or TAs, or anyone in the institution who just maybe be acting a little bit ableist and needs a little bit of a check-in, we will attend the meeting with a student to make sure that they feel supported and that they feel like they're being advocated for. We also offer service recommendations because it can be a little bit difficult to navigate university life as a disabled student, as Elizabeth was mentioning before. And so just having someone who's been through that same experience and being able to advise them on where to go next can be really beneficial. Again, attending appointments alongside students, and then any other disability-related advice and support. So what have we accomplished this year? Because this is the end of our school year, and so we're just wrapping up and hiring our new director and assistant director. So we kept an attendance sheet, which our peer support volunteers were required to mention how many students access the space for the day. And so roughly more than 361 students accessed our in-person space, which is quite a lot for a small service in the basement, especially considering that we were really devastated by the impacts of COVID and we really struggled with operation last year. So 361 students is a lot. We had 22 events over the period of 8 months. So that includes things like our coffee house. We've had a lot of meeting related events, which have been pretty popular. We've also had Zoom making events, which people really enjoyed. And then events like this one, which are co-hosted by NEADS, which have been lovely. And then we've also had bi-weekly meetings with student accessibility services to address concerns with their service that have been brought to our attention. So this year especially has been really rough with accommodations for students. We received a lot of negative feedback on our accommodation system that was put in place. And so we've been meeting with them quite frequently in order to advocate on behalf of students and kind of iron out those little details. And so that's an example of some of the in-person advocacy initiatives we do. We've also been invited to also been invited to give feedback on events that are expected to happen in terms of like if they are accessible, what they can do to make it more accessible. Or for example, we have a community garden on campus, and they were wondering how they could make their space accessible for students who use wheelchairs so they can help out with like tending to the garden or even just accessing the fruits and vegetables, which was really important. So yeah, we've accomplished quite a bit this year, and it's been a really lovely experience. And then obviously, thank you to NEADS for helping us with this event again. If you're interested in getting in contact with us, our Instagram is at MSU_NACCESS. And you're more than welcome to reach out if you have any questions, if you're interested in collaborating for the next year, or anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for sharing what Maccess does. It's such a brilliant group, and I've been following your work for years. So thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for your patience. We will now proceed to the panel. We have amazing panelists that I will quickly present, and then we will move on to the first question. APAC is a first year honor life sciences student at Mac, specializing in sensory motor systems. She is currently a peer support volunteer at Maccess. Passion Press is an honor English and cultural studies student. He works as a peer support volunteer at Maccess when looking to rest and unwind. Basil enjoys gardening, snorkeling with dogs, and hanging out with chickens and ducks. Allie McMeekin is a fifth year student in the honors and science program at Mac. They are physically disabled and chronically ill individuals, and is deeply committed to fostering inclusivity in academic and community spaces. Allie serves as one of the resource executives for Maccess, where they are currently developing an accessibility guide for teaching staff. To promote an inclusive and accessible classroom environment for all students beyond academics. Allie has been an advocate for disability rights for many years and continues to share their story to inspire change. Sister Murphy is a fourth year honors social work student at McMaster University. They are a volunteer and training executive at Maccess, and their academic focus is primarily math studies and disability justice. They love working closely with disabled students to address inaccessibility and foster a strong disability community at MAC. Calvin Prowse est la peer worker, futurist, researcher, educator, and creative based in Hamilton. They are an alum of McMaster University and York University, and the professor in the School of Community Services at Seneca Polytechnic. During their time at McMaster, they were involved in a variety of disability and math peer support advocacy group. Gavin is currently the team lead for the Youth Alliance for Intersectional Justice peer support program for marginalized neurodiverse youth. And Annie Starr is a fourth-year honors social psychology student at McMaster and critical disability studies academic. The area of expertise lie within the power dynamic research in narrative of self-diagnosis, forms of communication, and is enthusiastic about critical neurodiversity, autism, and math studies. Annie is also the current assistant director at Maccess. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Okay, question number one. In your opinion, what is the meaning of non-numbers with others in the context of post-secondary education?
Hi. In terms of post-secondary education, and I apologize for earlier, I'll speak a little bit slower. Nothing about us without us really means making sure that community is always there beside you rather than, I guess, behind you, just because like with self-advocacy work, it can be very easy to just keep going and expect that you're the only individual that's going through it. But in actuality, there's a whole group of people who are experiencing very similar problems and ableism within the institution. And so making sure that, you know, when you are advocating, that you're doing it with other people because you're stronger together than you are individually, and making more systemic and institutional change is really important.
I think also like one of the big things, especially with that institutional change, is like only some people are going to be in that room, but like we can bring everyone's concerns to these like meetings with student accessibility services, and like when we're making sure that nothing happens without us, we're able to make nothing happen without all of us. Like we can talk to each other and form a really strong community and have a good understanding of what everyone needs, because all of our needs are different. Like being able to put that all together and make change that includes everyone. I think that's the most important thing for me, I think.
I strongly believe for thinking about nothing about us without us, that in like a classroom setting or like in education, that we should have education be accessible, so that in terms of like SAS, we should be able to like have the accommodations we need without necessarily feeling like we're being like we have to have like a certain level of disability, so to access these test centers and have the accessibility that we need to be able to function. So in the context of post-secondary education, I feel like it's important that there is like a space for us, and that there is like nothing about us without us. Like there's education, and folks with disabilities are also a part of that and have the access that they deserve.
Just like face this direction. For me, I think the most important part is having disabled representation at every step of the way, and not just a token at the end, not just a face on a poster or one student advising against one disability. It's having us involved from the planning of what we're going to do to the implementation to the execution of it. It's making sure that disabled voices are being heard at every step and being honored, and that they're taking into account everyone and not just one like niche group that one person can speak on. By getting more people involved, we are able to represent more disabilities and further a space where everyone can be involved. So yeah, I think it's just really important to have us all incorporated at every step and not just on a poster or as a last step.
Thank you. I think for me, the meaning of nothing about us without us in the context of post-secondary education really boils down to making sure that we are being considered at every step, not just as sort of checking off the box of like creating accessibility, but also continuously revising that practice and continuously becoming better within that practice. As well, I think a lot of the frameworks of accessibility in the university setting and beyond is built on a disabled individuals' relativity to the able-bodied experience. And I think that's a system that causes a lot of harm to disabled communities. And I think nothing about us without us allows disabled communities to break down some of those barriers and make sure that what is being done is for disabled communities and not just to say that there have been steps to achieve accessibility.
Yeah, I think just to echo what some of the other panelists have said, thinking a lot about the process and like having a meaningful process and not a checkbox approach where we're just doing it or they're just doing it because they think they need to talk to us. And also thinking about like the process and also power. I think so often systems, including post-secondary, they like to do this consultation so they can get that checkbox. But then, they'll do a consultation with a community and the community will be like, this is a terrible idea. And then they will say, we consulted with the community on this project, but they won't do what the community actually wants. Yeah, and that's a problem, right? Like, so I think about, sometimes there are like engagement groups or like co-design groups who actually has the final say, who has the veto power. And most oftentimes it's the administration who gets to veto what disabled students want and need, when it really should be the other way around. Disabled students should be able to say, this is fucked up. And then, yeah.
Thank you. We will move on to the second question. How can nothing about us without us stop within the classroom setting and towards campus life?
I was just kind of reflecting because this does relate to the last question as well. We've had multiple advocacy initiatives specifically this year where ableism within the classrooms has been really rampant. And for a lot of students, it feels like a really individualized problem, just because there's no way to have that communication. And the system itself is very one-on-one. So for example, like a student may be having difficulties getting an extension on a project because the professor doesn't believe in accommodations. And so the student may just kind of take that hit, just say like, I tried my best, but in actuality, like it's a problem spread across the university. And so until you have that like community connection with other people and you start having those conversations, you start bringing people into those classrooms with those same experiences, nothing's really going to change because we're not really that strong when we're individuals. And so specifically within the classroom setting, making sure that with like universal accommodations, like who is being left out of those conversations around universal accommodations. So like some professors, at least at McMaster University, will use the term universal accommodations without actually consulting disabled students. And then just kind of making the broad statement that their classrooms are accessible when they're actually not. And so just making sure that like with note-taking programs, that there's consultations without like, so is another problem that we experienced this year, but like without just getting rid of note-taking programs, what are the alternatives that we can provide to students rather than completely eradicating them? And having those consultations are really important. And just kind of like taking a step up as like instructors, and like I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but like making sure that those classrooms are accessible generally in the first place. If there's stuff that's in the way, making sure that like you're helping out students by moving like garbage cans that are blocking doors, or like making sure that the accessible seating area isn't also blocked by garbage is really important.
over the past year, especially in my classes, I keep trying to like make disabled people like a part of the conversation by like going and talking to my professors and saying like, here are some problems that students are facing. How will this be addressed in this class? And a lot of the time, they're like disabled people are just not part of the conversation. Like we are not part of things from the beginning. Like they retrofit classes to fit us into them as best they can, and it doesn't always work. So nothing about us without us, primarily I've found has been just in the community building that we have been doing over the past year, like getting to know each other and helping each other with the problems that we're facing in classes and just across the university, because it doesn't really work alone. But when all of us are able to talk about a problem that someone's facing, and like we all have different knowledge and expertise that we can bring to these concerns, it works. Like we actually make a change, and it's just, I don't know, it's nice that there's like such a strong community now where we're able to do that.
I think in terms of like showing up in like a classroom setting, making sure that TAs are like in tutorials are well informed about people with disabilities, and professors as well, knowing that, hey, like, if a student needs accommodations, they should be able to get it without going through like a process of having to explain themselves. And I think throughout campus life as well, I think having more events where, for example, Welcome Week, and Pogo, having like it, those campus experiences accessible to those folks as like individuals as well. And allowing them to also have a campus life that they can enjoy and not have to feel as if they are left out. Yeah.
So for me, I think if we look historically, nothing about us without us has not been maintained within campus life. And even now, it still is not prevalent enough. And I think in the university, nothing about us is without us is something that really has to be a priority going forward, and not doing any more decisions that we'll have to retroactively like fix in like a year when people realize that they're problematic. And so I think it's starting with every building from now on, making sure there's disabled people's input in everything, and taking responsibility as like an institution for knowing that in the past they've made bad decisions, and going forwards, we really need to make sure everyone's included, especially even with upcoming Welcome Week. That's the next generation of students, and hosting an event in the middle of the field is not accessible at all. And so like little things like that one decision in a change in location will affect so many students' ability to participate, and really taking the time to listen, to hear their mistakes in the past and be willing to correct them for the future.
I think a lot of the time in my experience at McMaster, there's this like idea of accommodations in the classroom being like, we'll figure it out when we get there, You talk to your instructor after everything's already been sent over, and there is so many hurdles that you have to jump just to communicate what should be very basic accommodations that maybe should already be in place as a general practice. But I think things like that, creating a community in which instructors can have conversations with each class in terms of like what the class needs, and not trying to sort of make a standardized environment and try to fit students into that standard would be really important. And I think as well, unbiased opinion, places like Maccess, where there is community and there is an opportunity to sort of work together on problems instead of sort of creating. I feel like there's a big habit within the institution to make issues of accessibility an individualized problem and sort of isolate them from community. So places like Maccess, where there is a community dedicated to helping everyone work through problems that would otherwise be labeled as individual in air quotes, is really, really important.
Just to briefly add on to that point, because you were talking about earlier, you were talking about Maccess being in the basement. And my understanding, I wasn't actually there at the time. My understanding is that was a purposeful choice from Maccess so that we could be closer to SAS and like grab people as they were getting out. So like a way of, yeah, being closer and building that community where people are already at. Yeah. I think when I'm thinking about this question, I'm thinking about the curriculum and like we have so many courses that are like about mad people, that are about disabled people, that are about neurodivergent people. McMaster has a psychology program that I unfortunately had the displeasure of going through. And there was not a single course on mad studies in that program or from mad people's perspectives. So when we're thinking about nothing about us without us, we also need to think about, yeah, whose knowledge are we including and centering and incorporating mad studies, disability studies into every course, incorporating lived experience knowledge. And that helps create the bigger cultural shift too, where, you know, like disabled people are normalized. We are seen as people having knowledge. We are seen as people that exist, that engage in collective action. I also think about, you know, nothing about us without us also means that people are listening to us. And I'm just thinking about, you know, I'm not sure if there's anyone from the McMaster Students Union in this room today or from the McMaster administration. So it's just kind of sad that we have this big event, you know, with NEADS, which is so lovely to have you with us on campus. I think it's the first time it's happened in at the very least a very long time. And you know, the people that should be listening to disabled students aren't here.
Think about that. Question. Oh, sorry. Question number 3. How would you define collective activism?
And it kind of ties into collective activism in terms of like, we've done a lot of work throughout this year and I can attest to that. And there's been a lot of change that has occurred and we have started to be listened to. But again, in terms of like, who's in the room with us, it was advertised to administration that we would be having this huge event. And yet we're still not really listened to. But in terms of collective activism itself, not only does it mean like showing up in the room with each other or looking over each other's notes on what you're going to say or figuring out a game plan for making sure that like actual change gets made, but it also means caring about each other. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but it is my little niche area of study, is kind of the care that exists within like justice and advocacy movements.
And so collective activism means like, especially in like disabled spaces, is like making sure someone isn't taking on too much work or making sure someone is actually advocating for their barriers and limits. And so I think that's a really beautiful part about disability advocacy work is there's always someone who's willing to step up, but there's also always someone willing to kind of check in on you and make sure that you're meeting your own boundaries, and then you're not pushing yourself way too far beyond your limit.
Like this is so hard to define because it's so big. But I do think it just goes back to like the community that we've been talking about this whole time. Like collective activism is being able to put together all of our strengths to actually achieve things. And it's having people to rely on when you can take on more, or when your disability is flaring up. It's telling people like that's actually not okay. They shouldn't do that to you. Like that is ableism. It's like making change together that would not be possible if we were all isolated, because you can only take on so much. There's only so many hours in the day. And if we don't like find a way to achieve things together and like divide tasks and like figure out what everyone is best at doing and enjoys doing, it doesn't work otherwise, but it works really, really well if we all work together.
I think for me, collective activism is, like Cecil said, working together. I think it's having like a sense of community as well, where you're not alone, you're not the only person with your like dealing with like your disability flare up. I think for me, hosting community circles, I think feels like collective activism, hearing about like in the Maccess space, hearing about people's experiences with their disability and honestly feeling so validated and not feeling alone. I think that's been collective activism for me, where you're not alone. It's you're speaking up about your issues that you're dealing with, and just not being alone. I think that's the main thing.
And I think I agree with a lot of what's already been said. I think that collective activism is a huge topic that can't be like, it's so hard to contain into one small definition. And so I think one element of it is power in numbers, and knowing that if you need a break, there's someone behind you, and if they need a break, there's someone else behind them. It's making sure that you're supported through every step and that you're not alone. And if it's not within your emotional capabilities at that time, that's okay. And knowing that you have a community to fall back on that will be able to continue with whatever you're fighting for, to make sure that progress isn't lost and that change actually happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add that hasn't sort of already been said, which I feel like is in collective activism. But I think for me, it's much of the same, building a community where you don't have to face everything alone, where sort of the emotional time commitment, physical labor of advocacy is shared within a group to make sure that everyone is able to get what they need or feel supported, or even just have a space where they can sort of exist in a larger culture that decides that they're not worthy being taken care of and being listened to and being heard. And so I think it's really just about creating a space in which you know that there are people there for you and you're there for them. A sort of shared commitment to each other and then also to progress.
I guess when I'm thinking about this question, I'm also thinking about, cultural change and to create these broader cultural shifts on the scale of like the whole university, the institution, whatever. That needs to come from, disability, that comes from disability culture, and disability culture comes from disability community. And so, even just being there for each other, like, it changes things so substantially. And as a self-declared old person now, I'm no longer a student here, and I've spent way too much time on this campus. But I've actually just seen how, like, just hanging out with other disabled students, other math students, has just accidentally created some sort of cultural shift on the campus at large. And that's really lovely to see. I think the other part of collective activism that I think about that is connected to culture is, engaging in like practices of like collaborative dreaming that like the world we live in, and the type of ways these institutions are set up doesn't need to be that way. And like, we actually like get together and start thinking about like all the ways that things are broken and all the ways that these systems could be dismantled, and we could build something else that actually works for us, where it's not based on individual accommodations, where it's based on universal design, where it's not based on othering and feeling like you need to self-disclose. Once we start doing that, we can start building it. Yeah.
Think about that. Question number 4. How can collective activism be practiced in the daily life of disabled and neurodivergent students? I realize that there are a lot of parallels between the last question. So if anyone has anything to add, feel free.
There's something that I want to add, and I attended a protest, I think, a month ago, which was related to the cutting of the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office workers at our university. And it was just honestly like having conversations and like, excuse my language, but like bitching and starting rumors really gets like information spread pretty fast, because people, like, institutions really don't like when you start rumors, and they absolutely want to shut them down. And so like something that I've at least started since my time as a part-time manager of Maccess is just sitting in the space and just like having conversations about what goes on at an administrative level that doesn't usually happen. And so sitting down in the space and saying, I can't believe that I heard someone did this in the office today, and it might be an ableist comment, or I can't believe I heard a professor say this today, is a really interesting daily practice, but something that I found has really strengthened the community in terms of like, I now know like the extent of ableism that occurs on campus based on conversations I've had with students. And I'm in this space quite frequently, and so I hear these conversations and I start these conversations a lot, which is a bit embarrassing for me. But I will say that it has been really beneficial in collective activism, because I've heard of problems that I wasn't aware of before, just because I have my own obviously unique experience with disability, and I'm not going to see certain ableist experiences that someone else might see. And so hearing about them and being able to say, we can actually do something about that, and knowing where to connect someone, I feel like is a really cool daily practice, but one that's kind of like undercover and that like institutions really don't like. So it really does stir the pot.
I also think, good points, first of all. I think also like we've been talking a lot about bigger advocacy initiatives that we've been taking on where we're like sending emails and meeting with people and like trying to make like big formal change. But in like everyday life, it can be so much smaller. And I find that most of that is just community building. It's like hearing that someone in class is struggling or just starting to like figure out the accommodation process and sending them a message and saying like, hey, this is a difficult thing. Like if you need help or you need to talk, let me know. If if you need help with this thing, I know someone who is really good at that. It's, hanging out with disabled students and trying to bring people into the conversation and get people talking. It's like just being there for people as much as you can and relying on people when you need it so that when issues do arise, like we have the foundation that we need to actually address it.
I think the way collective activism can be practiced in the lives of disabled and neurodivergent students is making sure that opportunities are equal. So for example, like positions and like research positions, there's no like discrimination from like professors because the student has a disability. Or, being like, if you're asking for accommodations and like volunteering or something, not being like, oh, like, why can't you do it? And, like professor not understanding your accommodations. I think also having more spaces for students to, I guess, learn about how to live with their disability. So I know the Student Wellness Center has their circles for people with anxiety, people with AD, like neurodivergence. So I think having more of those, I feel like would be a lot helpful rather than just limited space and you're fighting to get in. I also feel like it can be practiced in just like for example, like the library having more spaces for students with disabilities to be able to study. And I recently learned about like the LAS and things. A space that we can like folks can study in. I didn't know about that before, and I feel like we should have bigger spaces for students with disabilities to be able to study and be a student.
I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. But one thing I will say is that I think it's casual conversations too. Just yabbing in the space, learning about other people's experiences is a really good way to progress your own knowledge and make yourself know more about the issues at hand and the issues the community is facing. And really just being open to having those conversations and being open to knowing that you don't know everything and you can still always learn. And even, just sitting in Maccess is such a great way to build community and be a part of a collective activism movement.
Yeah, I think just as an extension of that point, making sure that you're committed to continuously learning, continuously understanding. I think especially looking towards intersectional voices, looking to how intersection can create experience. And I mean, I'm a big believer in complaining. I love a good complaint. Those who know me know I love to complain. I love to kick up a fuss. And I think that's, as Honey was saying, that's a really big underrated way to make change. I think like specifically maybe when I was a little less quick to complain and sort of make a fuss, make a problem. I let a lot of things go that I definitely like shouldn't have just accepted. So I think it is useful to have a community of people that can just be like, yeah, that sucked, dude. Like that should not happen. And just looking towards that. So complaining is resistance in a funny, cool way.
Don't think I have anything to add to what other people are saying, but I had some other thoughts just around like, student organizing and collective activism is dangerous and disruptive, and it's dangerous because it's disruptive. Really like refusing to accept the way things are is super dangerous to the status quo, and it has kind of become increasingly clear in the past few years that people are afraid, students in particular, which is why we have policies that are like banning protests on campus and stuff like that. Which is to say, it's working, right? And as scary as things sometimes are, I think a better world is on the horizon. Just might take a little longer than we might like.
Thank you. That leads so into the last question. What lessons can be learned from collective activism currently occurring on both secondary campuses? This is the final question. So if you have any concluding thoughts as well, you can share.
Thank you. I think as Calvin was saying before, like being able to experience like the danger of collective activism has been really cool. And I guess that's a lesson to be learned. And reflecting, I guess, because I am outgoing, not in like the personality way, sorry, in terms of like my position, reflecting on like what I have done over the past year. I wish I was a little bit braver, and I wish I did start a little bit more shit. I am in my last month, and so they can't really fire me. And so now I have the opportunity to do stuff like that. And so like, I guess that is a lesson to be learned. It's just like, be a little bit braver, and like, like they do have to rely on you for the service to run, and they do get a lot of value out of the service. And it would start a fuss if the service did close. And so like being able to have that power in your hand is really important. And I think also learning through collective activism that like people have intentionally been separated from one another. Like I only just met some of the other managers of other services within the last month or so after we've been engaging in a personal collective initiative. And so it's interesting to see those like little things unfold. So yeah.
The biggest lesson that I have been learning over the past year is don't forget about history, especially like in university when like students are coming and going and we aren't great at documenting things. A lot of like there are a lot of problems that people have tried to address in the past, and then it's been forgotten because we don't talk about things and we don't write things down and we don't look into the history of like what people have already been doing. So trying to like just keep talking to each other and sharing what we're doing and writing things down and like making plans for the future, but also considering like what has been done in the past and the problems that have existed in the past and what what problems have existed for far longer than they should. Things would be a lot easier if that was a consistent thing that's been happening.
I think for me, like a lesson that can be learned throughout my years at university is to speak and to speak up about the things you're struggling with, because you may think that you're alone, and you never know that someone else might be going through the exact same thing, and it can be a very validating experience to be like, wow, I'm not alone. I think having conversations with people and not feeling any sort of shame towards that, I think is very important as well, to just be like, and to stand up for yourself in regards to with maybe a professor, if they're not, giving you the accommodations that you need, and talking to people and speaking up for yourself. I think that's a lesson that I've learned, if you will.
I think I've learned a lot of lessons this year. As a first year, it's very different than high school. But I think I learned how much my voice matters, and how much my experiences matter, and how much sharing my experiences matter. Because I knew before this, I had a place in the world and all that cliche stuff, but I didn't really realize how sharing my story did make me be able to connect to people more. And even realizing that sometimes when I share what's happened, it's a lot less okay than I thought it was before. And that just having that community behind you when you share those shitty experiences that will go with you to file whatever is getting filed, or go to the meetings that are really, really annoying.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm hoping to, if nothing goes terribly wrong in the next few months, to go to teachers college and to become a teacher in high schools. And I think, although this is a very personalized experience, I apologize. I think one big thing I'm taking away from my experience contributing to and sort of immersing myself in collective activism through my time here at Maccess and McMaster University is learning how I can support communities that might not have the administrative institutional support that they deserve. And also, just in a broader sense, learning that activism is a labor of love. It's an act of love from communities that, especially in the university sort of situation, these people might be graduated, but each step that we take forward is a testament to the love of the community that has come before us, that will come after us. And although it is difficult, I think it's also incredibly beautiful, as cheesy as it sounds, to see a group of people come together and work to make things better, not only for themselves, but for a broader community that they may never get to personally interact with.
Hey, hi. I think building off the, conversations around history and institutional memory, which is I have a little presentation later, which is focused on that. Kind of. So yeah, I think thinking about that, thinking about, having some sort of process for archiving history, even if that's just we made a thing, now it exists. So making a zine about whatever, and then now it exists in the Maccess space, maybe we don't have to be super official about it, but leaving evidence, right? Leaving stuff behind, so that the next generation can find it. And also building connections with community outside of the academy, and building intergenerational connections so that, you're not suddenly the assistant director of Maccess and you're what happened? The MSU deleted our entire OneDrive. We have no records of anything that's ever happened before. And you'll be able to talk to people that can prepare you emotionally for what's to come, can give some suggestions, and also maybe like practically support. Like I know it's been really lovely also for me as a previous coordinator of Maccess to see the wonderful ways that it's changed too, and to have the privilege of being able to stay connected. Yeah, so I think trying to build that like intergenerational student community, that build community outside of the academy can also be a way of helping that. And you can just hear the stories from the people directly. People love talking about their days working for the MSU.
Thank you. I think with access of digital time in society, there is still change despite all the negativity and the ableism, homophobia, racism, transphobia that is directly preventing not only on our campuses, but throughout society as well. So these concepts, such as this one, is so essential and the folks are leaders, and we do leadership on a daily basis, whether it is recognized or not. So thank you all for your capacity and your energy in this channel. It was truly brilliant. First of all, we have Allie, McMeekin, and then we have Calvin Prowse. So I will invite Allie to go first and then followed by Calvin.
Oh my gosh, you're so inspirational. Why? Because I got out of bed? Or because I went to class? I never get told I'm inspirational when I'm doing something that could actually be inspirational. It's when I'm in line at the grocery store or just existing. Why is it that society views my basic existence as an inspiration? Is it because I'm disabled? Or is it society's uncomfortability with people who don't function on a normative level? Hi, my name is Allie McMeekin. I'm 18 years old and I am both physically disabled and chronically ill. This has been my entire life, but I went undiagnosed for 12 years. I was constantly labeled as attention-seeking or dramatic. I constantly got told that everything was normal, but it wasn't normal. Nothing was normal. This is just a little about my story and how it plays into today's topic, which is my existence is not your inspiration. And it is exploring how society views disability. I was born normal. I was not a disabled child. I went to school and was in a, air quotes, normal classroom. I played sports, but I slowly fell behind. I got hurt nearly every day and I was different. I just felt different. When I was 8, I was always in pain, and my doctor told me that I was just growing. I was good at school, but not gym. Gym was my enemy, especially when I got to high school. I could not keep up, and the pain was preventing me from my education. I could not walk from class to class. I was told now that I was injured and began my journey with mobility aids, and I was constantly hit in the face with ableism. When I was undiagnosed, I was called lazy. I was told to try harder. Now I am diagnosed with a genetic progressive disorder that will affect my ability to walk and live for the rest of my life. My disorder affects every part of my body. People say I have a lot wrong with me, but it's one disorder that was overlooked for 12 years and slowly took over. Now, as someone who is diagnosed and uses mobility aids to maintain my freedom, I am told I am an inspiration because I go to school or because I am independent. And the issue with this is that if you take away disability, I am nothing special. I am just existing. This is just one aspect of how society views disability, and it shows that they don't see us as an inspiration for having a body that betrays us, but they see us as an inspiration for a theoretical existence. So why is society so confused and out of touch with our existence? It's not one person, but the system at large. Think of elementary school. How often did your teachers show a picture representing disability in everyday life? When you were deciding a career, did they show you a doctor in a wheelchair or a lawyer? Or did you only see someone who was disabled when they brought them in to do an inspirational speech? Did they say that Stephen Hawking was an inspiration because he was a genius who never gave up? Or did they say he was an inspiration because he was disabled and did something with his life? I was taught that disabled people were exceptional or invisible, and there is no in between. So I thought I was screwed for sure. You see, the way schools depict disability matters. Children are the next generation, and by pushing the idea that disability makes you an inspiration is taking away the ability to do something actually inspiring. It limits us to the label of disabled person and takes away society's label of doctor or student or advocate. For most people in society, disabled people aren't your frontline daily interactions. We are something that you look at or stare, or maybe even wave when you wouldn't wave at another stranger. We are not real people. We are there to inspire. And for even some of you here today, on some level, you are probably expecting me to inspire you with a story of overcoming disability, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. That will not be happening. I am not here to be another disabled inspiration. I'm here to show you that me getting out of bed is not an accomplishment. It is not something to idolize. And I want to show you how society is built around this idea of disabled inspiration. This happens because of perpetuated ableism within society that views disability as bad. They tell you that to live with disability makes you exceptional because your life sucks and you're going out in public. And how does society push these ideas? It's really subtle, and a lot of people in society don't look for it. But when you open your eyes, it's not that subtle. For example, inspiration porn. It's not just a funny name, it's the truth. These images are objectifying one individual for the use or benefit of another. They are used to show people how much worse their lives could be. Like this, for example, the only disability is a bad attitude, or what's your excuse? The first one's completely wrong. My attitude is not disabling me in the slightest. And it insinuates that I could escape disability. No amount of smiling will make me walk normally. No amount of journaling or reflecting will let me get up a flight of stairs. And no change in perspective will change my genetics. Or these ones, the disabled athlete who beat the odds, or the person who found love despite their disability, are framed in a way that positions disability as the story's central and the source of their value, instead of being one aspect of who they are. They don't see them as an athlete who has trained their entire lives to get to where they are. The chair screams out first. This is problematic for two reasons. It is showing us as objects, pushing society's preconceived notions. And two, it is blatantly saying that disabled people's lives are worth less than those of able-bodied individuals. It is saying that disabled people's lives suck, and thank God I'm not them. Which, how does it feel when someone comes up to you and says, I cannot imagine if I had to be in a wheelchair. I'd just die. What is that saying to the disabled person? And this is a common experience within the disability community. People act like they can say anything. And this is reinforcing the idea that our lives suck. And if we should be able to, you should be able to as well. I recently watched a TED Talk by Stella Young, who is the person to coin the term inspiration porn. She says disabled person versus anything else. And she pointed out a really interesting point that I'd like to share with you. She talked about the social model of disability, which says that we are more disabled by society than our bodies. It says that life is difficult when you're disabled, but your body is one source of your difficulty. Most issues come from society's views and policies that deny equal opportunities, the systems in place that actively isolate and discriminate those with disabilities and perpetuate disabling capitalism, or similar terms like ability capitalism, which suggests that disability is not merely a personal issue, but a structural outcome of a capitalist system and policy. This follows the social model of disability. I think I should get back on topic. I know at the start I said my existence is not an inspiration, but I do want to point out that I can do inspiring things. But that is regardless of my disability. And you can be an inspiration too. You can make real change and show people your existence. Let me say that again. Everyone here today can make real change. No matter who you are, you make an impact. Your existence matters, and you can use what life has dealt you to fuel your power, to power your change. And change doesn't have to be some big, scary topic. Change can be anything. Whether it improves your life or someone else's, it matters. And you get to do it on your own terms, with your own emotional capacity. And yes, I know I made a spelling error. I guess that's why I have so many writing accommodations. Maybe this still applies. You can be accepting. So I want to talk a bit about how I include passion in my life and some changes I've tried to make. And I can be an inspiration, but that is despite my disabilities. I view myself as a person who doesn't give up easily. And yes, my disability allows me to showcase this. But if someone says I'm an inspiration, it's not because my legs don't work right or because my brain is wired a little differently. I want it to be because I'm actually doing something. And I think that's why I fight so hard for opportunities, so people see me as something and care a little less about the chair. I want my passion to be an inspiration, or literally anything but getting dressed. For a small change I've fought for is my service dog. This took a lot of grant applications and a lot of begging my parents, but I finally have a service dog and I will get him in 8 months. And then a bigger change I've done is speaking at conferences like this. This is my 4th conference to speak at where I've gotten to share my story. And every time I get to connect with new people and build a larger community of disabled people and people who have their experiences heard. My disability is my life, and I am not better for it. I am not a token of your appreciation. I am a person who has maybe done some kick-ass things. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. I'm Calvin. Hello again. I'm going to do a little presentation about disability organizing at McMaster University. But it's a brief and incomplete history because I have not been here forever. So it's only just some things that I know about. I have like way too many slides, but also I'm hoping that if folks have like questions or like comments, you can like let me know, because it's more fun when I don't just talk at people for 20 minutes. Okay. So I was putting this together and I was thinking about Mia Mingus when she writes about leaving evidence that we were here, that we existed, that we survived and loved and ached, evidence for each other that there are other ways to live past survival, past isolation. It can often be so isolating coming to a new place, McMaster, and not knowing there are other people on campus with similar experiences, not knowing there are other disabled students, maybe not knowing that you yourself is disabled, which is how I came here. And we need to be able to leave evidence, yeah, that we're here now, and also we have been here. I don't know much about this, but I have heard that, like, I think sometime in like the 1980s, there was like a handicapped student union at McMaster University. And like, just thinking about, I love community. And the thing I like about history is that it adds a whole other dimension to community. That I'm not just in community with people right now, but I'm in community with people from the past and in community with people from the future. And especially when it takes so long to make meaningful change in environments like this, it gives me a little bit more motivation that the stuff that we're doing, that you're doing, the kind of collective activism people are doing is going to make a difference. Even if we don't see it, it'll be maybe other students 10 years down the road that are actually feeling the change that's made. So a couple of things I've been thinking about is this idea of institutional memory and what gets forgotten in the institution, in the academy, which often runs at about a 4-year cycle because people graduate. And So there aren't people around that actually remember being here 5 years ago. There are staff, but somehow they also seem to forget, I think maybe on purpose. So sometimes it'll be staff that tells you like, oh, this is the first time we've ever heard of this or thought of this. And like, it's actually not true. And they should actually know better, but they just have forgotten as well. But I'm also thinking about kind of like cultural relics that stick around, that leave that evidence in some sort of like substantial material way, even if it's just a point of time. I'm thinking about the cultural shifts that have changed that I've kind of seen. I think thinking about that history, really helps us understand why things are the way they are now, and helps us see that things actually don't have to be like that things could be different, that the way things exist right now is a result of the past, and we can do the present differently to create a different future. And also more practically, it can give us some ideas about like what organizing strategies have been effective and why, and also what ones haven't worked, so that we don't, burn out and keep trying to do the same old things that just aren't working, if the university's not listening. People like to write a lot of petitions, and I don't know. I'm not sure how well they work. I think they do work to some extent, but they don't feel super exciting to me. So I made this nice graphic, which kind of confuses me, which is about MAD and CRIP lineages of organizing at McMaster and in the surrounding area. And so I've mapped, there's definitely more groups. This is not all of the things during this time. This is not all the period of time. I was only around in the green areas there, which is 2012 to 2016, and then 2018 to 2022 is when I was like physically or virtually on campus, I guess. And thinking about the relationships between institutional groups that are like officially a part of the institution, as well as grassroots groups where people just start doing stuff, and groups in the broader community. And there's often a lot of relationships between them where they feed into each other. And I think they're all important, right? Grassroots groups can often get away with saying some more radical things and doing some more radical actions that, organizations that are a part of like the MSU maybe can't, or has to be like really sneaky about. But having those groups within the institution is also helpful because they are often taken a little bit more seriously. And there's like pathways for consultation and whatever. And then community groups also really important so that, the change that's happening here can also go out, and change the broader world, especially as people also leave here and go out into the broader community, as well as making sure that the stuff we are doing here is shaped by what's going on in the broader community. We might come back to that, but there's, yeah. Anyway, a graph, little picture. So I wanted to talk about a few of these, one of these being the Hamilton MAD Students Collective, which was from around 2012 to 2016 at McMaster. It was not officially a part of McMaster. It was kind of a grassroots peer support community for MAD, mentally ill, and psychiatrized students. It was originally a kind of local branch of a group called the MAD Student Society, which started in Toronto in 2005, I believe. And I think kind of faded out probably around 2014. The Hamilton MAD Students Collective might have kind of been a part of that because as MAD Student Society was kind of dwindling a little bit, our chapter started and then got really busy and then we split off. Anyway, I was involved in this group actually for basically all that time. It might have been 2017. I don't know. It kind of started fading around 2016. Anyway, Hamilton Mad Students Collective, HMSC for short, was pretty neat. We had kind of like a 24/7 email listserv where you could, write an email and everyone on that list would get it. I like to think about them as like a two-way email newsletter. So you could just email everyone at any point in time, which was really cool. We also had like regular in-person meetings and like sometimes like went out to dinner and people would post things like, hey, I'm moving, I need to get rid of some stuff. Does anyone want these teacups? Or be like, I'm on campus, does anyone want to go grab dinner? So it also facilitated a lot of like kind of informal community building. And at its peak had around 200 members, over 200 members. Not all of them were like posting super regularly. Not all of them were attending the groups. A lot of the times we would meet in person, I would say maybe 10 to 20 people max. But sometimes there are people, I think there is a value to lurking in community. Just like being in the community without necessarily participating can also be really valuable for folks. The administration started to get worried that we had this 24/7 email listserv that people could post whatever they wanted. And there wasn't like a formal process in place to like, what do you do if someone's in crisis? Who takes responsibility? Who's liable? Because it kind of wasn't that type of group. It was like basically like a Facebook group. It could have been, right? Who's responsible for Facebook groups? But the university did get kind of scared as the group got bigger and became something that people actually started to know about. And that was one of the pressures that the group faced towards institutionalization that eventually was related to the creation of Maccess. It wasn't the only pressure. I have this graphic on the right of Link from Legend of Zelda holding a piece of paper, and it says, it is my disability and I get to choose the accommodations, which is a meme that I made. Especially in relation to one of the relics that this group left behind, although I'm not sure who has it still. But we had this like contraband list of SAS accommodations. SAS, the accessibility department, did not want people to know what they could do for them, which feels weird, especially when when I was first figuring out this sort of stuff, I didn't know what I needed because I didn't know what would be helpful. I just knew that everything was hard all the time. And so like we crowdsourced this list, like I have this accommodation, I have this accommodation. I think they might have found out about it at one point in time, but they would not have liked it. I mean, it still exists. Someone definitely has it on their computer. I probably have it on a backed up hard drive somewhere. It's also probably changed since then, but it was very cool. The Hamilton Mad Students Collective was also involved in the creation of Mad Pride Hamilton. And there were a couple years where there were actually, I think 2 years where there were Mad Pride events in Hamilton, like not just as a Maccess McMaster thing, but broader community, which was really cool. I have this missing sign next to the Mad Pride Hamilton logo because it's been a few years since we've had a citywide Mad Pride event. And every summer I start to think about like, oh, we should bring that back. And then I get tired. But it's a thing that did exist and could exist again. Another thing that the Hamilton Mad Students Collective left behind was this zine. There were a couple of zines, 2 issues of this, called This Insane Life, which there's a picture on there with the cover, and there's like a person and some letters and medication falling. Which was just a zine made by Mad students. So people just like submitted everything. So we had like poems. There was like a bad ally bingo chart where you could like fill out and stuff like that. There was, I think, something about ableism in the classroom, like almost like an audit sheet. And then people, were sharing their experiences. One of my friends put had a piece in there, which was like all the different places that she would sit on campus when maybe she wasn't feeling completely safe. And so there's really powerful sharing of NAD student experiences. Some of the things that I think been left behind from the Hamilton Mad Students Collective, we have the language of madness. Like I can talk about madness in a room like this, and people kind of know, people have maybe heard about it before. As opposed to when I first started, the language was very focused on mental illness. Okay. Also the Mad Pride framework, we have that now. Like we did not have this idea of Mad Pride, or I think even disability pride before then. And like, it's fantastic that we have this now. And there's maybe more of a focus on like discrimination than there was before, when we were just like stigma, anti-stigma, like don't be mean to people that are mentally ill. Or actually it wasn't even don't be mean to people that are mentally ill. It's like people with mental illness are people too. Like, okay. And now we're actually saying like, okay, maybe we shouldn't discriminate against people. And so mad people are seen as like an actual like equity deserving group. Not all the time, but like much more than they used to be at McMaster. So that's some of that stuff. I am really behind because I prepared way too many slides. One of the neat things about Maccess is before it was an official MSU service, it was a grassroots network, kind of like the Hamilton Mad Students Collective, where it had that listserv. Which was that's like a fun fact. And it really came out of folks that were involved with the Hamilton Mad Students Collective, as well as disability organizing on campus. And it replaced, before Maccess was an MSU service, there was a part of the diversity services service that had to do with disability. So we replaced that and got an actual physical space, which makes community so much easier if you have a place to go and it's not just like one event every 2 weeks. Oh, y'all know about 2016 Inaccessibility Week. The folks in Maccess like basically covered all the buildings with caution tape saying caution inaccessible. They did not ask for permission. This was like within, I think, like a month of the service starting. And the administration was so mad. Like there was the building managers were like, how dare you do this to my building? Like it was like because they were making it visible, right? They were making all the failures of the institution visible, which does not make them look good. Saying that they have a service dedicated to disabled students makes them look good, but having that service be too radical and be too disruptive, they don't like that. In 2020, the pandemic happened, and we had to move our entire service online over Discord. And I think, does the Discord server, it kind of still exists? Yes. Okay, cool. So it's an internal community use. Perfect. Before 2020, Maccess had tried to create a Discord server because disabled students have always needed a place to connect remotely. On campus connection was not always possible. And the university, the MSU said, no, this is a liability. So I think about like crisis, opportunity. The COVID-19 pandemic was like, look, we need this. And everyone needed this. It's kind of like this universal design accessibility stuff. And so we were able to do a thing that we needed to do beforehand, and it has stuck around in some capacity. So now we have that, the beauty of pandemics. The Disability Action Group is a group of the McMaster in the McMaster School of Social Work that I don't think really exists anymore. It's coming back. Perfect. That's all I wanted from this slide. Bring it back. Yeah. Pushback on Mac was 2022, really. This was a group that I guess, co-founded. And we were just, so it started from like I was having peer support meetings with people in my, or we would have like a weekly peer support group with people in my program while I was doing my MSW here. And I was like, wow, I'm really stressed because the university is forcing everyone back to campus during the Omicron wave, which is when basically everyone in the province got COVID. The worst timing ever. And they were like, oh, you can maybe get accommodations. But then I was like, I need to go make an appointment with my doctor, get a medical documentation, and then make an appointment with my SAS coordinator in the span of a month between when they announced it and, and that's not possible. So I was really complaining. And then the folks I was complaining to were like, that's super fucked up. Let's do something about it. And I was so burnt out at this point because the pandemic, I was burnt out from working for the MSU the previous year, that like I had like 1% capacity. So it was really about like I kind of was able to step back and other people stepped forward. And it was really cool because, it was really student-led, but also staff, faculty ended up getting involved. And we were thinking about like, these policies are impacting all of us, like in different ways, but yeah, like staff are also having to deal with the same problem. Faculty are having to deal with the same problem. And what do faculty need to be able to deliver, hybrid courses? What do faculty need for them to be able to say, my course is online, we're not doing this? We wrote a policy brief. We posted a whole bunch of testimonials on social media. We did a petition and an open letter, which I think was penned mainly by staff, which was cool. And so it was really, for me, it was thinking about, how can students and staff and faculty come together? Because for the most part, the administration is not on any of our sides. And the things that make students' lives the most miserable and the ways that profs often make student lives most miserable are also influenced by like the policies of the institution and like the ways that like it's all about the money. They don't want to give staff enough like support to be able to do things like have a hybrid class and have someone to manage that hybrid format while they're teaching. What happened to the disability studies minor? It's been like a decade. This is my question for the McMaster administration, who is not in the room with us. People were talking about this around 2015. People were starting to work on this around 2015. And it seems like every now and again, someone picks it back up, but like there are courses right now that have MAD and disability studies perspectives built into them. Not enough, but like there are courses. And I could probably name a whole bunch of people that could develop new courses for us, like off the top of my head. We could do this right now. It could be done by the end of the year. Yeah. My questions for us: how are we leaving evidence? How are we building an archive? And how are we contributing to cultural change? I think sometimes the answer is you don't know until you've looked back and you're like, oh, this stuff is still sticking around and you can trace things back in time. But it's also something for us to think about. One of the things that I learned is that community groups can actually upload to Maccess, which is where people upload like their theses and stuff like that. So, and it's like an institutional database, which means it's there forever. You don't need to like post something on Google Drive. You can just throw all your like you could have an actual archive. Anyway, it's kind of a pain. Maccess does have an account, but the issue is that it's linked to a McMaster email. So it needed to like be manually transferred from one coordinator to the next, but I'm sure you could get it back at some point. I don't know who has it now. That's it. Thank you for hanging out. If you haven't already seen the Peace, Love, Unicorns, and Communism documentary that came out last year, do that. It's great about student activism at McMaster more generally. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone. I'm Aaliyah and I will be doing the closing remarks for the final tour stop. So over the past 3 years, the NEADS team has been touring the country to engage with disabled and neurodivergent disabled students. We have visited campuses in rural and urban settings and have witnessed the labor and dedication of disabled students and allies who work tirelessly to foster accessible and inclusive spaces for their peers. We have heard from folks who readily encounter barriers and challenges while attempting to pursue their rights to receive a post-secondary education. The State of the Schools tour has allowed NEADS to amplify the brilliant advocacy and initiatives of disabled and neurodivergent students, whether that be in the classroom settings or throughout campus life. It has been so wonderful hearing their narratives and participating in discussions pertaining to the future of post-secondary education in Canada. We would like to thank all activists, allies, community members, faculty members, partners. We also want to thank our closed captioners and ASL interpreters, as well as everyone here today. Thank you, who have been here today and have attended our stops. We are grateful for the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada, who has made the tour possible for us. This is our final stop of the State of the Schools tour. Please follow us on our various social media platforms and websites and stay tuned with our work. And from the bottom of NEADS heart and all the disabled students all around Canada, thank you.